My cousin ditched me for a cruise and left me with 5 kids to babysit. But I refused, and what happened next was shocking. My name is Ellie, 38 years old, childless by choice, and always the dependable one in my family. I've spent years playing the role of the cool aunt, the one who shows up for birthdays, gives thoughtful gifts, and takes the kids on little adventures. But recently, my family's thoughtlessness reached a new level, and it left me questioning everything. A month ago, I was on a casual phone call with my cousin Victoria when she let slip a detail about an upcoming family cruise. She had been talking about packing when she mentioned how excited she was for the trip. Her words stopped me cold. I hadn't heard anything about a cruise. Realizing her mistake, Victoria awkwardly explained it was for Aunt Alice's retirement, a big family celebration involving everyone, my parents, my siblings, my cousins, and their spouses. Everyone, it seemed, except me. I waited for someone to reach out and explain, but the silence stretched on. Days later, I decided to call my sister, Ava, to ask about it directly. Her response was hesitant and full of excuses, but the truth came out. They had decided I would stay behind to babysit. With 5 kids ranging from a toddler to a preteen, they thought it made sense for me, the childless and responsible one, to take on the role of caretaker for the week. The revelation hit like a slap in the face. It wasn't just about being left out of the cruise. It was the assumption that my time and life didn't hold the same value because I didn't have children. My family had decided, without even asking, that I would stay behind and take care of their kids while they relaxed on a luxury vacation. It felt demeaning and dismissive, as if my only worth to them was in what I could do for them. The days following that conversation were filled with growing resentment. My mom, likely prompted by Ava, called to smooth things over. Her attempts to justify their decision only deepened the sting. She framed it as a logical choice, saying the family couldn't afford to bring everyone and pointing out how much I loved the kids. Her reasoning felt hollow. It wasn't about practicality. It was about convenience. I was the easiest person to exclude. Sitting alone in my apartment after the call, the quiet felt oppressive. I had spent years being there for my family, always stepping in when they needed help, yet they didn't think twice about leaving me out. They hadn't even asked if I wanted to go or if I was okay with their plan. They had just assumed I would comply, like I always had. Scrolling through social media to distract myself, I stumbled across a photo Victoria had posted of her brand new luggage, captioned with excitement about the cruise. It was clear they weren't even trying to hide it. The image stirred something in me, a mix of hurt and anger that was impossible to suppress. This wasn't just about the cruise. It was about years of being taken for granted and treated like a convenient solution rather than an equal. Unable to hold it in any longer, I decided to address the issue directly with the family. I opened the group chat and typed out a message, asking if I wasn't invited because they had assumed I would stay behind to babysit. The silence that followed was deafening. Minutes passed before the responses started rolling in, and each message felt like another blow. Their justifications were full of thinly veiled excuses. They tried to frame it as a practical decision, emphasizing my reliability and how much the kids loved me. Others dismissed my feelings entirely, claiming it was only a week and not worth making a fuss over. One cousin even suggested I wouldn't have enjoyed the cruise, as if they knew my preferences better than I did. The implications behind their words were clear. Because I didn't have children, my time and life were somehow less valuable. When I pointed this out, the responses became defensive. Some accused me of overreacting, while others insisted I should be grateful for being trusted with such an important responsibility. The conversation solidified what I had already begun to suspect. To my family, my role wasn't that of an equal member, but of someone to lean on when it suited them. The realization was painful, but it also brought clarity. I had spent so much time trying to prove my value to people who didn't seem to respect it. This wasn't just about a cruise. It was about setting boundaries for myself, something I had been avoiding for far too long. By the time the group chat fell silent, I knew I couldn't continue allowing them to treat me this way. Their casual disregard for my feelings had crossed a line, and I was done being the family's convenient solution. For the first time, I allowed myself to sit with the anger and the hurt, knowing it would be the fuel I needed to make a change. After the group chat debacle, I made my stance clear. I would not be babysitting, and they would have to find someone else. I muted the chat, tossed my phone onto the couch, and tried to shake off the frustration. The next morning, the call started. Ava, relentless as ever, called multiple times before I finally picked up out of sheer exasperation. She wasted no time accusing me of making everything harder for everyone, framing my refusal as selfish. Her words were like pouring fuel on a fire, but I stood my ground, emphasizing that I wasn't being difficult. I was setting boundaries. The conversation escalated quickly. Ava insisted that everyone needed the break and that the kids adored me, as if that made their assumption acceptable. When I pointed out how unfair and dismissive it was to decide my role without even consulting me, she dismissed my feelings entirely, calling me dramatic. I wasn't going to let her guilt me into compliance. I ended the call after firmly reiterating that they needed to figure out childcare on their own. The fallout from my refusal rippled through the family like a shockwave. My mom called next, her voice trembling with what I knew was performative sadness, lamenting that I was tearing the family apart. My dad left a terse voicemail, accusing me of being petty and ungrateful. Even Victoria chimed in, sending a message urging me to reconsider because, as she put it, my decision was ruining her relaxing week. The audacity of their guilt-tripping was almost laughable, but it also hurt in ways I hadn't expected. Despite the barrage of calls and messages, I held firm. I decided to use the week they would be away to focus on myself, something I hadn't done in years. I booked a secluded cabin in the mountains, a place I'd always wanted to visit but never made time for. It felt liberating to reclaim my time and energy to plan something entirely for myself. As I packed my bags, I felt a strange mix of lingering anger and budding excitement. I was angry at how my family had treated me, but the idea of stepping away from it all brought a sense of relief. When the day came for the family to leave on their cruise, I didn't bother saying goodbye. Instead, I loaded my car, turned on my favorite playlist, and left town. With every mile I drove, the weight on my shoulders seemed to lift. By the time I reached the cabin, tucked away in a lush forest with a breathtaking view of the mountains, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The days passed in a tranquil blur. I spent mornings hiking the trails, afternoons curled up with a book, and evenings on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee. The solitude was healing, a reminder that my life was my own, not a resource for others to exploit. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. But even hundreds of miles away, my family couldn't let me go. They found ways to poke at me from afar. Ava sent photos of the kids with captions about how much they missed me, as if that would make me reconsider my stance. My mom flooded my inbox with lengthy messages lamenting how my refusal had driven a wedge in the family. I ignored all of it, refusing to let them drag me back into their web of manipulation. One evening, while sitting by the fire with a glass of wine, my phone buzzed again. This time it was my cousin Daniel. His message caught me off guard. He expressed understanding for my decision and admitted he thought the others were being unreasonable. It was the first time someone in the family had acknowledged my perspective, and for the first time in days, I smiled. It was a small comfort, but it meant the world to know that someone understood. The morning after booking my escape, I had woken up to a series of missed calls. My mom, Ava, and even my dad had tried to reach me, but I wasn't in the mood to deal with their guilt trips. The calls kept coming, each one more insistent than the last. Eventually, Victoria called, her exasperation evident the moment I answered. She didn't even try to hide her frustration, accusing me of being difficult and selfish. Her words dripped with entitlement, as if my time and effort were obligations, not choices. Her insistence that babysitting wasn't a big deal only fueled my resolve. The underlying assumption that my life mattered less because I didn't have kids was a slap in the face. I calmly made it clear that my time was mine to spend as I saw fit, and I wasn't interested in being their unpaid nanny. She grew more agitated, accusing me of selfishness and making things harder for everyone. But I wasn't the one who had made this a big deal. They had, by assuming I'd comply without question. I hung up before the conversation could devolve further. Over the following days, The calls and messages intensified. Ava sent long texts about how much she and the kids needed the vacation and how my refusal was ruining everything. My mom called again, this time with trembling emotion, emphasizing her disappointment. Even my dad, who rarely involved himself in family drama, weighed in with a stern voicemail accusing me of letting everyone down. Each message stung in its own way, but I knew their attempts to guilt me were a reflection of their entitlement, not my actions. Through it all, I kept reminding myself why I had said no. This wasn't just about one week or one event. It was about breaking a pattern of being taken for granted. For years, I had allowed my family to prioritize their needs over mine. Saying no wasn't just an act of defiance. It was an act of self-respect. As the sun set over the mountains one evening, I felt a quiet strength settle within me. The voices of my family, filled with guilt and entitlement, began to fade into the background. Here, in the stillness of the forest, I found something they couldn't take from me: peace. The week leading up to my escape had been nothing short of relentless. My family seemed determined to break me down with a steady barrage of calls, texts, and even unexpected appearances at my apartment. Each interaction reinforced their entitlement. Each voicemail reeked of guilt-tripping, and each text was a masterclass in manipulation. They all shared the same message. I was the selfish one for daring to set boundaries. By the time the week came to a close, I was mentally and emotionally drained. I knew I had to leave, not just to get away from them, but to reclaim the peace they seemed hell-bent on shattering. If my family was going to enjoy a luxurious cruise without a thought for my feelings, then I decided I deserved something equally indulgent. I spent hours online searching for the perfect retreat, scrolling past countless options until I landed on one that immediately caught my eye: a secluded, luxurious cottage nestled on the edge of a forest. The photos were enchanting. A two-story structure of rich wood and stone, enormous windows that framed panoramic mountain views, a private hot tub steaming on the deck, and a cozy fire pit surrounded by comfortable seating. It promised everything I needed: tranquility, beauty, and most importantly, distance from the chaos. At $2,500 for the week, the cottage wasn't cheap, but I wasn't going to let the cost stop me. My mental health and peace of mind were worth every penny. As soon as I hit confirm on the booking, a wave of relief washed over me. This wasn't just a trip, it was an escape, a declaration of independence from the toxic patterns I'd been trapped in for years. The drive to the cottage was cathartic. Each mile I put between myself and my family felt like shedding a layer of tension. The congested city streets gave way to open highways, which in turn transitioned into winding country roads lined with towering pine trees. Their branches, still dusted with the remnants of last week's snow, seemed to bow under the weight of the winter landscape. The air outside grew colder and crisper the further I drove, and with it came a clarity I hadn't felt in years. When I finally arrived, the cottage was even more magnificent than the pictures had promised. It stood proudly against the backdrop of snow-capped mountains, a testament to serenity and craftsmanship. The wooden exterior was complemented by stone accents, and the large windows gleamed in the afternoon sun. Steam rose lazily from the private hot tub on the deck, while the fire pit, surrounded by plush outdoor seating, looked inviting enough to melt away any lingering stress. The inside was even more stunning. High ceilings with exposed beams gave the space an airy, open feel, while a massive stone fireplace dominated the living room. Plush leather couches were arranged around the hearth, practically begging for someone to sink into them with a good book. The kitchen gleamed with state-of-the-art appliances and a fully stocked pantry that promised indulgent meals. Upstairs, the master bedroom boasted a king-size bed adorned with the softest linens I had ever touched, and the en-suite bathroom featured a deep soaking tub positioned perfectly to take in the view of the forest. For a moment, I stood in the foyer, taking it all in. I could feel the tension in my shoulders begin to ease, my clenched jaw relaxing. This place wasn't just beautiful. It was a sanctuary, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere my family had created back home. I kicked off my boots, set my bags down, and let out a long, satisfying sigh. This was where I was supposed to be. That first evening, I treated myself to a meal that felt downright extravagant. I pan-seared a thick steak to perfection, paired it with buttery mashed potatoes and sautéed green beans, and poured myself a generous glass of wine. As I sat at the dining table, the fireplace casting a warm glow over the room, I allowed myself to savor every bite. The food was delicious, but more than that, it was a symbol of my choice to prioritize myself for once. After dinner, I wandered out to the deck and slipped into the hot tub. The water was deliciously warm, the jets massaging away the stress that had settled deep into my muscles over the past week. Steam rose around me, merging with the crisp evening air as I leaned back and gazed up at the night sky. The stars were brilliant, unencumbered by the light pollution of the city, and the silence of the mountains was almost otherworldly. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. The next morning, I woke to the gentle glow of sunlight streaming through the large windows of the master bedroom. I stayed in bed for a while, wrapped in the soft linens, simply enjoying the stillness. No buzzing phone, no accusatory messages, no intrusive knocks at the door, just the sound of birdsong and the occasional rustle of the wind through the trees. I spent the day exploring the trails around the cottage, each turn revealing another breathtaking view of the mountains and valleys below. The air was crisp and invigorating, filling my lungs with every deep breath. By the time I returned to the cottage, my cheeks were rosy from the cold, and I felt a sense of accomplishment that had nothing to do with pleasing others. As the week went on, I indulged in the luxury of the cottage and the freedom of being completely alone. I read books I had been meaning to get to for years, journaled my thoughts and feelings, and even spent an afternoon curled up by the fire, doing absolutely nothing. It was a kind of self-care I hadn't realized I was missing, and it felt transformative. Occasionally, my phone would buzz with yet another message or a missed call, but I ignored it all. For once, I wasn't interested in justifying my choices or defending myself against their accusations. This time was mine, and I wasn't going to let anyone take it from me. As the week drew to a close, I realized something profound. This wasn't just a temporary escape. It was the beginning of a new chapter. For years, I had allowed myself to be the family's emotional and logistical crutch, sacrificing my own needs for theirs. But here, surrounded by the beauty and stillness of the mountains, I had rediscovered something I had lost: my own worth. I packed up my things on the final morning, taking one last walk around the property before heading back to the city. As I loaded my bags into the car, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope. Sadness for the relationships I knew might never fully heal, but hope for the freedom and peace I had finally reclaimed. Driving back, I knew I wouldn't return to the same dynamic that had driven me to this point. I had changed, and I wasn't going back. Later that evening, the phone calls began. It wasn't a gradual trickle. It was a flood, one after another, with no room to breathe in between. Ava called first, then Victoria, then my mother, each leaving increasingly angry voicemails when I didn't pick up. The first few were guilt-laden, filled with phrases like, "How could you do this to your family?" and "We trusted you, and you let us down." But as the hours wore on, their words shifted to outright hostility. Ava's voice cracked with frustration as she accused me of being selfish and inconsiderate. She went on about how difficult it had been to scramble for childcare at the last minute, lamenting that the neighbors she'd entrusted Noah to were apparently unreliable. Victoria's voicemail, on the other hand, was pure venom. She didn't bother with guilt or pleading. She went straight to blaming me for everything, including the fact that she had to cancel her plans. Her words dripped with spite. "You've cost me thousands of dollars, Ellie. I'll never forget this." By the time my mom called, I had lost the capacity to feel anything other than exhaustion. Her voicemail was a mix of crocodile tears and thinly veiled manipulation. She mourned the supposed rift I had caused in the family, claiming I had tarnished Aunt Alice's special trip with my selfishness. There was no acknowledgement of their actions or how they had made me feel. To them, I was the villain, and they were the innocent victims of my rebellion. I couldn't listen to another second of it. I silenced my phone, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat down on the couch, trying to collect my thoughts. For years, I had bent over backward for my family, always putting their needs before my own. And now, when I finally drew a line, they were treating me like a traitor. But instead of succumbing to the guilt and anger they wanted me to feel, I found myself growing more resolute. I wasn't the one who had ruined things. They had made assumptions about my time and my willingness to sacrifice for their convenience. They had excluded me from something as significant as a family vacation without so much as a conversation. And now, when their plans had fallen apart, they were blaming me for the consequences of their own actions. Over the next few days, the messages continued to pour in, but I refused to engage. I busied myself with unpacking, catching up on work, and planning my next steps. Each time my phone buzzed, I reminded myself that their anger was not my responsibility. I wasn't going to carry the weight of their poor decisions anymore. A few days later, I received an unexpected text from my cousin Daniel. He had stayed out of the drama during the initial fallout, but now he reached out with a message that was short but meaningful. "I get it, Ellie. You're not wrong. Hang in there." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of validation. Someone in the family understood where I was coming from, even if they didn't say it outright in the group chat. It wasn't long before the family's wrath started to shift. When they realized I wasn't going to respond to their tirades, they turned on each other. Ava blamed Victoria for starting the whole mess by mentioning the cruise in the first place. Victoria accused my mom of orchestrating the entire plan without consulting anyone. Even my dad, who rarely got involved in family drama, sent a message to the group chat saying the whole situation could have been avoided if they had just treated me with a little respect. Watching them unravel from a distance was surreal. It was like observing a storm that had moved on, leaving me untouched but still wreaking havoc elsewhere. I wasn't happy to see them fighting, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of knowing they were finally forced to confront their own behavior. By the end of the week, the calls and messages slowed to a trickle. My family had finally exhausted themselves, or maybe they had simply realized I wasn't going to cave. For the first time in what felt like forever, my world was quiet. The peace was unfamiliar, but deeply comforting. In the weeks that followed, I made some decisions about how I wanted to move forward. I wasn't ready to cut ties with my family entirely, but I knew I needed to set firmer boundaries. Their assumption that my time was less valuable because I didn't have children had been the final straw, and I wasn't going to let them diminish my worth again. I started small. When Ava sent another passive-aggressive text about needing help with the kids, I replied simply, "I'm not available." When my mom tried to guilt me into attending a family dinner, I told her I needed time to focus on myself. Each time I said no, it felt like reclaiming a piece of my life that I had lost to their expectations. The family dynamic wasn't fixed overnight, far from it. There were still moments of tension, still the occasional jab or guilt trip. But I held my ground, and slowly, they began to realize that I wasn't the same person they had taken for granted all these years. In the end, the week I spent in the mountains wasn't just a getaway. It was a turning point. It reminded me of my own worth and taught me the importance of prioritizing my needs. My family might never fully understand the impact of their actions, but that was okay. I didn't need their validation anymore. I had found something far more valuable: my peace. That evening, as the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a bittersweet sense of relief. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions: anger, sadness, frustration. But for the first time, I felt like I was stepping into my own power. My family's relentless guilt-tripping, their entitlement, and their inability to see my perspective had been a weight I'd carried for too long. Now, I was finally shedding it. Blocking Ava and Victoria felt like removing a toxic layer from my life. Their constant messages, filled with blame and manipulation, had done nothing but drain me. Cutting that connection didn't mean I stopped caring about my nieces and nephews. I still loved them dearly, but I needed to protect myself from the adults who seemed to see me as nothing more than a convenient solution to their problems. My mom's plea for reconciliation echoed in my mind. I didn't take her words lightly. I knew this would hurt her, but I also knew that giving in would mean falling back into the same cycle. For years, I had bent over backward to meet their expectations, always putting their needs above my own. It was time to break free from that pattern. I spent the next few days focusing on myself. I took long walks in the nearby park, immersed myself in a new book, and even started a yoga class I'd been curious about for months. For the first time in years, I wasn't worrying about anyone else's expectations or judgments. My life finally felt like it was mine. Then, one afternoon, I received a package. It was from Aunt Alice. Inside was a handwritten note and a small wooden box. Her note was short but heartfelt. "Ellie, I've been thinking a lot about what you said. You're absolutely right to stand your ground, and I hope this little gift reminds you that you deserve to be treated with love and respect. Inside the box is something I've cherished for years. I want you to have it because I see the strength in you, the same strength I had to find in myself years ago. With love, Aunt Alice." I opened the box to find a delicate silver bracelet with a small charm engraved with the word boundless. Tears welled up in my eyes. It wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol of the freedom I had fought for. Aunt Alice, the one person who truly understood, was giving me her quiet blessing to continue on this path. Her gesture reaffirmed my decision to set boundaries. It reminded me that family isn't just about shared blood. It's about mutual respect and support. Aunt Alice's understanding felt like a lifeline, a connection to someone who saw me for who I was, not just for what I could do for others. As the weeks turned into months, the dust began to settle. The family group chat grew quieter, and the frantic calls and messages tapered off. Ava and Victoria's absence from my life left an undeniable void, but it was a void I could fill with peace, hobbies, and people who genuinely valued me. I even reached out to a therapist, someone to help me unpack the years of guilt and pressure I'd carried. Each session was like peeling back a layer of a burden I hadn't realized was weighing me down. Occasionally, I heard updates about the family from Daniel, the only cousin who had taken my side. He told me that Ava and Victoria were still fuming, but that Aunt Alice had defended me during a family dinner. Apparently, she called out their entitlement and reminded everyone that I had every right to say no. It brought me some comfort to know she was in my corner. Life didn't magically become perfect, but it became mine. I started planning trips to places I'd always dreamed of visiting. Italy, Iceland, and Japan were at the top of my list. I reconnected with old friends and made new ones, filling my life with people who valued me for who I was, not for what I could do for them. Looking back, I realized that this experience had been a turning point. It forced me to confront the unhealthy dynamics I had accepted for too long and taught me the importance of valuing myself. My family might never fully understand why I did what I did, but that was okay. I didn't need their approval anymore. As I sat on my balcony one evening, the bracelet from Aunt Alice glinting in the fading sunlight, I felt a quiet sense of pride. I had stood up for myself. I had chosen my peace, my happiness, and my worth. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free.